I get to be the director of belonging, meaning, well-being, and purpose here at the Forum Fam. And can we just have another round of applause for that opening? Thank you, everybody. I get to welcome and introduce the closing panel, but before we do, and to keep the spirit, I feel like Jose just set me up so beautifully. On your table, you will see blank postcards and hopefully some markers. And we're going to make affirmation cards that we're going to give to someone else before we leave. I've heard several people say, this is the time that fills my cup up, and I'm not ready to go home yet. And so we're going to make an affirmation card for someone else in this community that they're going to take with them. So on a hard day, on a lonely day, we can have a little piece to remember how we felt in this community together. So on the card, it can either be your own personal mantra that gets you through hard days that you want to share with someone else. It could be a quote or a piece of wisdom that you collected here this week. For me, who is in the Love in a Burning House Design Institute with me? So mine is, we are medicine. We are medicine. So let's just take 1 minute, think about your mantra that you want or your affirmation that you would like to write on a postcard. Oh, and there's stickers also, just good vibe stickers. And we didn't get to look at every single sticker. So if anyone looks like it's hustle culture or some kind of statement that doesn't resonate with our values, just throw it in the garbage and we'll move on. But also feel free to use a sticker if you're looking for some extra inspiration. Are we ready? Okay, and when you're ready, can you take your postcard and pass it to 3 people away from you? So pass your postcard 3 people away. Okay, and when you receive your new postcard, there's a lot of love happening at the front of the room. Okay, so when you read the message that you received, if it resonates with you, take it home and keep it with you and use it when you need it. If you feel like maybe that message was for someone else, it's a postcard. And so you can send it to anyone you want. And if there was somebody here that, much like the rocks on Monday, if there was someone here who particularly inspired you and you think that message was for them, before we leave, you can pass your postcard off to somebody who inspired you this week. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so I am over the moon to get to introduce this panel because it's actually 3 personal heroes all on stage at once. And I think that's a sign that you're in the right place when multiple heroes from different places in your life are all together. And I'll go ahead and let's welcome you up while I'm introducing you. Should we? Okay. So this week has been such a powerful reminder that we are not just building programs or systems, but we know that we are building relationships that can hold and build transformation. And so it's in that spirit that we are hosting this panel today. So let me start. Come on up. So as they're getting settled, let me start with John Kania. So many of you know that John is one of the original authors of the Collective Impact article. It's the most forwarded article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review in history. It is the foundation of so much of our work here in the Opportunity Youth Network and in the Forum for Community Solutions. And when I was a new collaborative leader in Del Norte and tribal lands in very, very rural Northern California back in 2011, I literally carried this article around with me. It was dog-eared and highlighted, and I was telling everyone I knew about this article because it gave me language for what we were trying to do. We were trying to bring people together across systems and agencies and nonprofits and tribes to work towards a shared purpose and to believe that local change could actually shift systems and improve real people's lives. And then came Dr. Sean Jenwright. He was serving as the board chair at the California Endowment when I was a senior program manager there. And Sean helped us see that just being trauma-informed, remember when we first learned about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that wasn't enough. We couldn't just measure everybody's ACEs and call it a day. That we actually had to move from just acknowledging trauma that people and communities faced, but to lead and serve with an approach of healing. And that shift from trauma-informed to healing-centered gave me such a helpful framework to talk about and organize my strategies. I literally had little Post-its along my whiteboard in my office that started with recognize ACEs, and then somehow, and I was always trying to figure out how to put those pieces together, and Sean's work was so, so helpful in that. He also helped remind us that healing is not just individual work. It is collective, it is cultural, and it is deeply political. And then there's somebody who is a hero, a personal mentor, my auntie, the Chief Judge Abby Abernathy of the Yurok tribe. You may have seen her featured on Hillary Clinton's next Netflix series, Gutsy. It's the same episode as Kim Kardashian. But to us, she is so much more than just a superhero. She is a matriarch, a mentor, a cheerleader, and a fierce systems innovator. She is also my family's neighbor at home on the Yurok Reservation. Judge is not only transforming the tribal justice system, but the entire approach to justice across county lines and state lines by infusing Yurok values into every part of the system. Repair, restoration, relationships, responsibilities. And that last R, responsibility, includes our shared responsibility to care for ourselves and to care for one another. And to me, that's what this week has been all about. And that's what our movement of belonging, meaning, well-being, and purpose is about. It's not only about building new systems that no longer create harm, or even thinking about systems to prevent harm, but it's about boldly imagining and building new ways of being that actively cultivate, repair, and healing. And so the through line of all this work, it's about restoring the flow of well-being in our communities, in our systems, and in ourselves. And so this week has just been a reminder that there are systems we dream of that are already being born right here and right now. So with just such deep gratitude and renewed purpose, please join me in welcoming John Kania, Dr. Sean Jenwright, and the Chief Judge, Abby Abernathy, teachers of what it means to build systems of love, hope, and healing. Enjoy this conversation.
Thank you, Geneva. Geneva Wiki, ladies and gentlemen. Or as they say in the old school hip hop world, a wiki, 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 wiki. Sorry. Okay, let's jump in. This is so exciting, and I'll add to the intros. And, you know, the bios are on the app, so you can look at the incredible history, and we're going to start with that from the personal in this journey towards healing with our esteemed panelists. But, I was thinking about it. We introduced the Trombone Shorty, a badass alumni band. All of these folks have spoken to this network before, so they're the OYF alumni speaker badass band. So we got the OG alumni here by popular demand, and really wanted to ask each of them to start with their own journey. And we'll just start down the line, John Kania, with you, which is great because Geneva referenced that collective impact article, and that was so powerful and really helped articulate a movement around collaboration. And John Kania has learned and grown and written about and done some transformation work himself. So I'm going to shut up and I know you're appreciative of that, and ask John to start with like, okay, healing systems. How'd we get here, John? How'd you get to that?
Cool, Steve. Thanks. And thank you, Geneva, for that introduction. Yeah, I just want to say I was here at the beginning.
Yeah, you were.
Was it 12 years ago, right? Yeah. And there was great energy, and there were great people in the room. But I came back like 10 years later. I was here last year, and it was like, wow, what has gone on? You know, it was just amazing the way this network has flowered and grown, and with branches and aspens and all that sort of stuff. So it's just wonderful to be back again, and it's quite an honor. But I'm proud to sort of have been here at the beginning. It's such a cool thing that's going on. Just a few words about my ancestors before I get into the story of how I got to healing systems. I am the grandson of Polish immigrants who settled in West Hartford, Connecticut. And I am the son, if you will, of Scottish immigrants a bunch of generations removed who settled in Tennessee. So I'm sort of a purple baby, I guess, is where I'm at. So at any rate, so yeah, how did I get to healing systems? I started in the sector in 2001. Prior to that, I'd been working in the for-profit sector, and I helped co-found an organization, a nonprofit profit consulting firm and think tank called Foundation Strategy, FSG, Foundation Strategy Group. And I was there for 18 years, sort of built and led that organization. Over the time that I was there, sort of the two key bodies of work that I was engaged with were collective impact, which is cross-sector collaboration at sort of large scale. Many of you are involved in collective impact, and also systems change. And about 6 years into doing the systems change work with collective impact efforts, I sort of stepped back and said, so how are we doing? And I think this was about 2015, 2016. And the reality was, the movement was going pretty well, including many people in this room. And we were actually seeing population level change, which is pretty darn hard to do. But what really, from my standpoint, as I was looking at the work, we were seeing population level change, but in my mind, we still weren't seeing systems move much beyond incremental change. They were not transforming. The power dynamics hadn't shifted, the dominant narratives hadn't shifted, the relationships and connections hadn't shifted. And so at that point, my work and my focus shifted to how do we move to more transformational systems change. And ultimately, I left FSG after 17 years and started up a new group that we have right now called the Collective Change Lab. And our focus initially was how do we actually sort of address this question of how do we get to transformational systems change. We pretty quickly got to the fact that the transformation really happens in relationships. So we're going to focus on relational systems change. And then the question was, why isn't that happening more in the work? Why aren't we having sort of deep relationships, et cetera? And so when you peeled that back, what you got to was we weren't getting sort of the relational change that we wanted to because there was disconnection and there was fragmentation. And that's at an individual level, also a collective level, and also at a systems level. When you peel that back, the disconnection and fragmentation, and say, why is that happening? What we came to, what our point of view was, the number one thing that was causing disconnection and fragmentation was, in fact, trauma. And so at that point, we actually shifted our orientation as an organization to what we now called healing-centered systems change. And that's how I got here in this room.
Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned the individual. Dr. G, no stranger to this crowd. At one year we bought everybody his book, The Four Pivots. How many of you have gotten, so that's great. If you haven't gotten it, give him a little bump on, on purchases, the four pivots. But the first, well, I don't know if there's a first pivot, but one of the main pivots is it's about self, right? And it's about shifting from a lens to a mirror. And so, John, you have been on a personal journey. Sean, tell us about how you got here to your latest thinking.
This is, first of all, it's healing to me just to be in this community with all that's going on in the world. And oftentimes, if we're not in community, it just stays with you. So it's just joyful to be with y'all and to be in community. Some of you may have heard me tell this story before, just kind of about, I think it helps to share about who I am, but how I came into healing work. My mama grew up in the South, a place called Trenton, Florida, small town out of Gainesville. And I grew up outside of Los Angeles, and my mama used to tell us these stories, me and my brothers, these magical stories about this little house she grew up in Trenton, Florida. And she would say there's these mango trees and there's these lightning bugs that kind of go over the pond at night. And as a child, I was fascinated, just fascinated by this little house my mama grew up in. And so this is about 10 years ago now, my mama said my uncle had passed away. She wanted me to go to the funeral in Trenton, Florida. And I decided to go, and I'm glad that I did. And y'all know how mamas are, right? They're so proud, right? So she was so proud of her son. And so we went to my cousin's house, and she told stories. And deep down inside, I really wanted to see that little house that my mama had always told us about. And so I said, Mom, I want to see the house. So she got up, and we walked down the street, and we took a left on this little dirt road. And I was getting excited to see this little house. And in the South, the trees have this moss that hangs down. And so we walked silently, and it was getting close to the evening, and I could see those little lightning bugs hovering above the pond, and I was getting excited. And then I could see the mango trees, and as we got to the house, I was shocked. I had expected to see a little house with, picket fence or whatever, but it was a shack, and it had a tin roof on it. And it was the first time I realized that my mother had grown up in such poverty. I didn't realize it. And as she took me into the house, I was crying and shit. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to cuss, huh?
You do you.
I was emotional. I was so moved. And she was excited, like a child, like at Disneyland. And she was showing me around this one-room house. And she looked at me and she said, boy, why are you so emotional? Why are you crying? I was like, Mama, I didn't know you grew up with such poverty. And she looked at me and something she said, I'll never forget. She said, boy, don't you cry. Don't you know I dreamed of you in this house before you even existed? And for you to come back to this place is a realization of my dreams. And that shifted me, y'all. And I realized that my mama understood poverty, but she wasn't defined by it. And so I think that also sets the context for some of my work as it shifted. It's like much of the work that I've done in my life, I've been trained to see young people as broken. I've been trained to see young people as needing to be fixed. And so I think my journey to healing is really trying to understand that young people are okay. It's the systems that are broken that need to be fixed. And we can only fix them if we can see beyond them like my mama did. That we can't just repair the system. Sometimes you have to create new entirely pathways. And so my process of my thinking about healing comes from both my family's experience of poverty, but also my work in Oakland, California, working with young people for the past 30 years. So,
thank you, Sean. Judge Abby, your journey, please. You're transforming the justice system through a beautiful body of work. Please, how did we get here?
Well, that's a good question. I often wonder that myself. Law school started for me. I went to school in a small town, and I hardly ever went, but I managed to graduate from high school, went into college because somebody helped me get into college. And at that time, they allowed anybody who graduated from high school to go into college. So I met that standard. And then when I was getting ready to leave college, I accepted, and I don't know what I was thinking, a invitation to go to coffee with 3 old native ladies. Now, anybody who's got any sense knows they're up to something, right? And I should not have gone to that coffee thing. So they start having this casual conversation about, wouldn't it be nice if you went to law school? And I'm thinking, no, why would that be nice? I don't even know where they are. I'm not going to law school. And finally, they just got tired of it and said, you're the only one graduating. You're going to law school, and then you can come home. I'd be like, I'm not. Yes, you are. Okay. And then I said, and he never did forgive me, Pim's father was, his mother was there, and I said, one of those boys has got to go to school too then. And she said, okay, I'll make one of them go too after you go. And he never did forgive me, but he went to law school also. And that's kind of where it started, and it was really about what I noticed is every time I got to a place like that, somebody helped me, and somebody stopped for me and said, okay, we're going to do this. You know, you're going to do this. I wouldn't have done it on my own. I wouldn't have got anywhere on my own. You know, when I had to leave home and I had to go, and I moved in with an elder who basically said, look, you're too dumb to be on your own, so you might as well come home with me. Oh, okay. You know, and she'd already raised 13 kids, so one more wasn't going to hurt, you know, one way or the other. So I did, and that's, you know, that was a long time ago, and that's when the dances were coming back, and when we first got to do those, and that made a big difference for me. So then I run off to law school, and I managed to get into a law school. The first one I got into, I managed to get thrown out of. But what was kind of funny about that is I called up this guy who was at the Indian law program in New Mexico, and I said, Hunter, they're not going to let me come back to school. He said, what'd you do? I said, Hunter, I didn't do nothing. He said, I know you, and I know it's your fault. I said, that's not fair, Hunter. This guy was like the picture dictionary redneck Texas guy. I know you guys are from Texas, but I mean, he was from East Texas. And then he just slammed the phone down. Before he slammed the phone down, he said, call me back in a week. I said, okay. So I called him back in a week. And he said, there's not a goddamn law school in this whole country that'll take you, so you might as well come here. I said, thank you, Hunter, I will. Now, the bad part of that is my 2 best friends from the pre-law program also got thrown out of their law schools, and he ended up with all of us. So you go, man, we're sorry, dude. He's like, you guys are nothing but trouble. You've always been trouble. I knew the minute you walked through the door. Oh, I said, Hunter, just calm down. It's not going to be good for you. You're going to have some kind of heart attack. He got to quit yelling at us. You know, but it was always something like that made the difference. And so when I went out to look at systems, and I saw them, and I saw it don't work like that. You know, it works one-on-one. It works. You got to have this, and you've got to be aware of everything around you, and not just the humans. I mean, humans think a lot of themselves, and that might be a little misplaced, frankly. But you know, there's a lot of other people around out there too: trees and bears and fish and rivers, and they're people too. And you've got to move with them and be with them. And, you know, they're not metaphors. They're real, and we have a relationship with them, and they can help you. Whenever I'm in real trouble, I sit up on my hill and I look at that river, because I know that river will help me, because it's always there for me. And I've done that for as long as I can remember. You know, that's how I find my way out. That's how I heal, how I come up with these crazy ideas I come up with. You know, it is the river's fault. It's not my fault. But no, what I did learn is that it really takes people stopping and going, you can do this, you know, and it is a fight. I'm not going to say it wasn't a fight, because it was a fight. There was lots of fights, you know, and I know we weren't supposed to cuss. We did, though, didn't we?
Well,
Anyway.
Redneck's not really a cuss, so you're
Well,
all right.
the other, no, I didn't think that was cuss. I thought that was descriptive. But but one of the things, yeah, one of the things I did learn from my mom about cussing was, she said, well, if they're real ladies and gentlemen, they won't even know what it means. If they know what it means, they got no call. So I'll just pretend like you all didn't even know what it meant. So that's kind of how I did it. And then when we when I started being a lawyer and going and working with people, it was always like that. I'll tell you one more lawyer's story. I was like up in front of this judge, and this other guy standing next to me, another lawyer, said, how come, he says to the judge, you always let everybody that she represents out of here without having to pay bail? Why do you do that? He was ticked off because I had just gotten somebody else out of jail. And the judge said, because if they don't come back, she'll drag them back. And the guy said, what? And I said, yeah. I said, this isn't rocket science, man. If a Yurok's on the run, he's at his grandmother's or his auntie's. I said, how difficult can that be? I said, you just got to hope he's at his grandma's, because then his grandma will whack him and put him in the car, and you won't even have to bother. Aunties are a little harder, but grandmas, they're meaner.
That's great. And I love that, in many ways we started with the individual, each of us, the young person, and whether they're a problem to be fixed or, or not, or John, your point that, you didn't see the relational change. So let's ratchet up from the individual, from that one client who it does takes a village to make sure they live up to their bail obligations, Judge Abby. But so we're at the individual. Now we're talking about healing systems. Now we're talking about the kind of level of this panel is about transformation of systems. So let's go there. So what does that look like? What does it mean? What does a healing? Let's define that. John, do you want to start with what the heck do we mean by healing systems?
Well, first of all, we are the system, so we have to acknowledge that. People are the system, and the system is made up of relationships. So when I think about what healing systems is about, it is helping individuals, organizations, and collaborations or networks to repair the rupture that they've experienced, often over generations, so that they can enter the flow of life and flourish. I love the flourish, and I think that's so much what it's about. But we're sitting inside traumatized systems. We're traumatized. Many of the leaders are traumatized. There was a study done, World Health Organization, of the trauma that existed in the world. The first study was done pre-pandemic. They came back and they said 70% of the world has experienced trauma. After the pandemic, it was 90%. So we are operating inside traumatized systems. And the people that created some of the worst rules in these systems were traumatized. That's why they did it, right? Because they were acting out of trauma themselves. So it's about, sort of what can we do to repair that rupture and just re-enter the flow that is basically just what humankind is all about.
You want to build on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with John. When I think of systems, there's two ways to think of systems, right? One is like the system is out there and is sort of this function of rules and policies and so forth. But we know that systems are people, right? They're relationships. And I think I realized that oftentimes there are broken people in systems that want to produce outcomes that are well when they're broken. And so it's not about a matter of changing policies and practices. You got to change people. And I think the work that I've been engaged in is trying to understand what does it take, what type of human being does it take to restore the well-being in systems? What type of human being does it take to actually create, we always talk about, the research on relationships, but, in graduate school, I learned all this stuff about theories and why Black youth were suspended and trauma. And one of the things they didn't teach us is how to cultivate a loving, caring relationship with young people. You didn't learn that, right? And so in these systems, I think I'm trying to understand, how do you focus on the conditions that actually produce flourishing and thriving? Not necessarily if you produce the conditions, which are the relationships, which is the trust, which is the vulnerability. If you can create those in systems, then the outcomes are inevitable. I first kind of learned about the idea of systems and trauma being in systems. Actually, I was doing a training for the LAPD, and I was about healing and trauma, and I was talking about trauma that young people experience. And then after the training, a couple of police officers came up to me, and they said, you know what, man, like, I understand there's young people that got trauma, but let me just share this story with you. And they said that there was an assault on an elderly woman in South Central LA 2 days ago. They went, they had the description, and they essentially were angry at when they got and saw the woman that was assaulted. She was an elderly woman. They were angry, and they said they were basically searched everybody in the neighborhood that was wearing a white tee and jeans, every black young person in there, right? Basic racial profiling. And then I said, well, why did you guys do that? He said, well, you know what? 2 days before, we witnessed a murder, and it was a violent murder. And when we went back to our office, we didn't have any way to, I was angry when we saw that murder. We didn't have any way to process it. So when we got to see this elderly woman, we wanted to take it out. We were angry. Now that sounds awful, right? But what it showed me is that sometimes there are people in systems that without a space to actually heal the wounds that they carry, they get carried out on other people in other communities. So if this happens with police, it also happens in schools, it also happens in classrooms, it happens all over the place. So,
How about on the res, Judge Abby, as you think about the transformation of your system that you've been kind of pushing on for years now, what does it look like? What does a healthy, healed system look like?
I mean, we're lucky in California because the invasion was only like 170 odd years ago. So we have a memory of that time that's closer than a lot of people, and that helps us, I think. And what our system looks like and what it's designed to be is an extended family. So that I have advocates and people. When I came home, we had 3 people working in the court. Now we have 50. And most of them are field workers because we have a lot of distance to cover up there. And their responsibility is to walk with that person to do what they need. And that person often knows what it is and, will come. And we don't make them get caught to get help. We don't make them do it in a certain amount of time. We let them set an agenda. We work with their agenda, and we help them do it. Can we get bossy? Sure we can. Because I said, our advocates are trained, but they're also culturally trained in the sense of your primary obligation is to act as an aunt or an uncle. You know what that means. Go out and do it. And if you're doing that, you're never going to get in trouble. Just do that, and let's get it done. So it's a lot about action, and doing with isn't telling you, go do this. It's, I'm going to go with you. Okay, let's go see if we can get a job. We're going to go with you, and we're going to help you fill out the application. You got to do this. You haven't visited your child. You want me to go with you when you do it the first time so you can, get some ideas on how to do it. Anything like that. We're there with them, and we meet with them as a team every 2 weeks. And the team can change depending on what they need. And that's the whole point of it, is to meet them where they are. And it's really designed to look like we've always looked before the invasion, which was to look like a family. And when family needs something, somebody steps up. And so whatever that specialty is that you need, then that person comes forward and they do it, because that's how it's supposed to be. And it's about responsibility. And our culture is it's not a power-based culture. It's a responsibility-based culture. So the practices have to reflect that. How do you assume your responsibilities is the message we're giving people. And how do you do that? And to understand, look, a lot of this mess that you're in right now, this was not your fault. You did not bring this crap onto the reservation. You didn't do this. You didn't start this drug stuff. You didn't do a lot of this. But it is your responsibility now. And you're gonna have to decide, do you want this to stop? And if you do, how are you gonna stop it? Or do you want to, I've said to people before with domestic violence, this is where it came from. You weren't parented because your parents were either taken into slavery in California, that happened to Native people, or they were taken to boarding schools. If you're not parented, it's really hard to parent. And I said, now you could make a decision. Who did you see, the first person you saw in your family hit somebody, and it was in your family. Now you find out which one of those things happened to them, because that's where they learned that. And now you decide, you want to sit back and watch your grandkids go to jail, or do you want to put a stop to it? It's up to you. Make a decision. If you want to put a stop to it, we'll help you. And that's it, because you can do it. And humans work better when they know why. They really do. It's sort of like, oftentimes you look at somebody. When I was first a juvenile court judge, I made this mistake for about a month. I'd look out, and these kids would come in doing the dumbest things you ever saw, and you go like, "What'd you do that for, man? Like, what were you thinking?" And they'd be looking at you like you were going to tell them what they were thinking or why they did it. And I thought, I best stop asking that question, because that's going nowhere quick.
Let's, and Sean, maybe we'll come back to you, because in some ways the village that the judge is talking about is what those police officers didn't have. And it was hurting other people in a system, to John's point earlier. Talk a little bit about how you start to translate that it is all relational to a system. Give us some examples. I know you, for example, you're doing work with the whole state of Illinois on this stuff, and John, maybe you can be thinking about examples of systems that are changing.
So two quick examples. One example, this was probably 8 years ago, we were working, I'm not going to call out the neighborhood or the city, but a funder actually asked us to come in and work with a group of 12 organizations that were all serving youth. And the issue was that the funder wanted them to collaborate, but the organizations, each of the executive directors and the staff, they were like gangs, right? They didn't trust each other. They were blaming each other. You got that funding and you ain't even doing the work, and I'm doing the work and I don't got the funding, and y'all know what I'm talking about. And so I got in the room, and the level of hurt and dysfunction was palpable. My biggest mistake was, we're like, I don't know what to do with this, right? Like, I thought it was a problem that could be solved in like 6 months, right? And it was the problem was trust. The problem was lack of relationships. The problem was that they saw, they couldn't see past their own misery. They couldn't see it. They couldn't see it. So we worked really hard, and it actually took it's a 4-year process, so the funders stuck with us and stuck with the groups. We worked with them on re-norming their own language, so we used some of the principles of the 4 pivots. Just the fact of lens to mirror, right? So folks started using terms in their work together. Is that lens work, or is that some reflection that we need to do, right? Do we need to look at our own stuff? And it was hard conversations, y'all. I mean, it was hard conversations, sitting in circle, probably twice a month with this group, having conversations about their trust. Turns out that what the organizations didn't know is that part of the historical distrust that they had of each other was a function of the way in which those youth programs were being funded. The funder would take a big thing of money and throw it into the community, and boom, and they would have to fight over the scraps. Y'all feel me? And some would get it and some wouldn't, and the favors and this, y'all, and it would happen for years and years and years. So the funding mechanism actually created distrust among the organizations, and they didn't know why. So we work with them to help them understand what is the trauma that they're dealing with. Is that they all love the black kids in the neighborhood. It's just the funding was creating the resentment among the organizations. So we had to have an honest conversation with the damn funder, okay? because but all money ain't good money, or the way that you deliver the money ain't right? So we had to have another honest conversation with the funder. I'm talking about trying to heal in the system. This is an example.
No, you keep
This is
going.
an example, right?
You got it.
So it turns out that we were able to give the organizations different language. We got them to understand that they couldn't see beyond the misery before them, right? And they had to get possibility thinking. And so they went back to the funder and they began to ask for different things. They asked for resources to actually be in relationship with one another. One quick, really quick example is they said we need to be in relationship with each other. We need to go on a retreat together. And so they said, where should we go on a retreat? This is a true story. Where do we need to go on a retreat? And they were, talking about a park nearby, or something. And we were trying to get them to think about possibilities. Where would you go anywhere in the world if you go on a retreat? And they were like, well, we would go to this park, or we would go. They couldn't think beyond the neighborhood. So then we said, well, if you could really go anywhere, where would you go? And they started naming places. So they actually said we would go to Hawaii, right? And we would go on a retreat to Hawaii. So we trained the organizations to go back to the funder to ask for resources to take this retreat in Hawaii, and they got the resources. We went to Hawaii, and we spent time together. We renormed. They built relationships. They changed their language and how they're working and thinking. And they're collaborating, and now they've created They've created a collaborative. It's called the North Omaha Collective, and they are advocating for a city tax to actually help fund their collective work, rather than only relying on that one funder, right? And so this is the kind of things that are possible when you actually heal the entire ecosystem in organizations.
And when you go to Hawaii, aloha, which we will see the deep work of justice reform in Hawaii, which we're excited for. Thank you, Sean and team in the back. That's a great example. We're pushing on time, so I want to just throw some idea and ask you guys just to lay it out there and make sure the stuff you wanted to make sure you communicated to our network got out. So one is about advice to collaboratives and to communities about how you do this kind of healing systems work. Think about that and just jump in, but also the conditions for healing, and then the context, the current context. We're in a moment where I think a lot of, I'll just say I'm guilty of in the past being like, man, the system's so broken, we just need to tear it all down, start over. Well, y'all, somebody's tearing it all down right now. And and it's nihilism we're up against. It's real ugly stuff. It's making government and systems evil when they ought to be healing and creating the chance for folks to thrive, or to use Sean's language, flourish. So in the face of the moment, the nihilism, the absolute disinvestment in communities that once again have to deal with the historical present of historic disinvestment, but now it's deep disinvestment. I'm looking at my friends at Youth Build, who have built a healing system despite government, but now are confronted with these kinds of cuts. So what do we do in communities to build this the way you just described, Sean, the way Judge Abby is describing? What do we do about the current context? And each of you has a couple minutes to just jump in on all of this, but let's start with you, John Kenya.
Yeah, I think, in the sort of, if I knew then what I know now, and in terms of doing cross-sector, collaborative work, collective impact, you can't do this work from a place where everybody is experiencing trauma, and that includes leaders. And I think that's one of the key things I've learned, because I think back to communities I've worked with. I could tell some great stories, but just in the interest of time, say a dozen years ago, communities I worked with where the work fell apart as soon as we left, and when we looked back at sort of what I didn't know then, but I would say now, because we didn't do the repair and healing work before we actually started on the work.
That's right.
You know, so rushing out and developing strategies without doing that healing work, without doing sufficient connection between the people that are engaged, you know, is bound to fail. And I think urgency right now, it's really hard to say this, but urgency is a trauma response. It's a trauma response. So we have to come at this from the standpoint of at least doing some level of healing before we get into the work. We've got to do some level of healing before we get into the work. And I don't see that happening much. I mean, we see it happening in pockets. But I think that's one of the big opportunities, is to make sure that we're doing that work before we do the work, right? So.
That's helpful.
So here's one practice I'm going to put out for what John just said, doing the work. So we have a lot that we're all navigating in our organizations, in our neighborhoods, and we have a way that we can, when we talk to each other, we get in these doom loops, that we have persistent ways of talking about the doom that is pending and that's ahead of us, and that we get in conversations and then we're in this doom loop. So one practice is to just recognize, hey, am I in a doom loop? And to try to not always be persistently in a doom loop. Because if we do work in a doom loop, it's always going to be in crisis. We're always going to be responding to crisis and trying to fix misery, which is urgent, but we also need to be looking at what is it that we need to create? What is it that we need to be imagining? What is it that we need to be dreaming about?
That's helpful. Judge Abby, what I hear in some of your story is you create the enabling conditions for folks to heal. And what I'm hearing from our other panelists is it's actually like doing this kind of work. Everybody seems to be if we're trying to get to 10, everybody seems to start at 3 when you need to start at 0, 1, and 2, which is the healing, the connection, the building a relationship. I feel like you've done that, Judge Abby, and I just wonder if you want to build on what our other panelists have shared.
Well, I do think it's sort of a call to look back into your culture, because we all have this in our history. And I think we need to do that, and we need to act on it. Because in the time before this country, a lot of us lived in villages, and you can't act like a jerk in a village. It just doesn't work. You know, it's not going to work for you. And so you got to think of projects that are inclusive, and even if all of them aren't, some of them can be, and you can sneak it by them. You know, that I'm good at that. And you got to just do it. Like, we think of a project, you know, the court has a cultural project where we go with a storyteller and his son, and we tell the story with a theater group. They make a puppet show. We put on the puppet show for the school, and everybody in the grade, whatever grade the principal has picked, is in that show, and all their parents come to the show. And that's everybody in that grade. You know, so we're reaching out across to other people, and they hear our story, and they hear how we do things. And that's how you do it. I really resent the whole thing with the federal government in a million different ways. But the part I dislike the most is what it's turned me into, which is if I get a grant, there's 564 tribes in this country, and there's only 7 grants. That means the rest of them don't get it. You know, we were not raised to be like that. And, you know, and it's ugly. And I don't like it in myself. And so we're doing more like intertribal work. Okay, if I get this treatment center, it's going to be for all of the tribes in the north, not for us. And we did it. And we're building it. Because that's the right way to behave. Because we were never like that before. And we do not need to go there.
Thank you, Judge Abby. And I think you're also speaking to the shift from scarcity to abundance, which I think is part of the story of how systems need to transform. And it reminds me actually of Valerie Johnson, a long time, the highest ranking native in philanthropy for a long time at the Kellogg Foundation. And they had launched an initiative to grow and build really powerful systems, the tribal colleges. And she went off to tell the tribal colleges, hey, there were 25 of them, we're gonna fund 15 of you. And all the tribal college presidents said, all of us or none of us. So she had to go back to the president of the Kellogg Foundation and say, and he, to his credit, added to the budget, and they funded everybody. So that's part of the same kind of structural change in philanthropy that you touched on, Sean, and that you helped lead at the California Endowment when you chaired. We are going to go to questions in a minute, so if you have them, just remember a question has a question mark on the end of it. That'll be appreciated, and we'll open it up. But I really want to give you guys a chance to build on the last point from Judge Abbey, and also maybe bring us to what you want to do next in terms of systems transformation. Money's not a problem. What are we going to do next? And each one of you, that's my last question for you before we go to the audience. What do we do?
Well, I mean, this has been a journey for me over the last 10 years or so. And I think the biggest teacher in that journey, if you want to take this journey, if you want to sort of become more trauma-informed, the biggest teacher in that journey will be you, yourself. You are going to learn more about yourself in the journey. And it's what has allowed me, and I would not call myself evolved in any stretch of imagination, but I've learned more about other people by learning more about myself. And I think what I would like to see would be an entire nation that's trauma-informed. And I'd like to see that leaders of efforts, who often may even be supportive, are actually doing the work themselves. Because it's like resisting this work happening, to saying, okay, it can happen, to supporting it, saying it's great, but I'm going to sit outside the process. I'm not going to do the work on myself. And to me, it's almost like there's an evolution of consciousness too. And I think there, particularly collectivist cultures, indigenous cultures, are less separated from themselves than sort of the Western modern world. And so, and yet, the culture in so many places is that culture. So how do we help all of ourselves sort of become more trauma-informed, including the leadership?
Yeah, and we may not have time for it because John has been in partnership with multiple nations around this and can share examples of other countries that are ahead of us, quite obviously, around this transformation of systems towards healing. Dr. G, what are we going to do? Flourish agenda fully funded?
I don't know, man. I think I've come to realize, that there's two types of problems. There's tactical problems, right? Those are problems where there's existing body of knowledge. There's a strategy. You can go get the knowledge, you can execute the strategy, and then you could measure your progress towards fixing that tactical problem. And then there's another set of problems, which are spiritual problems. And spiritual problems are problems that there is no existing body of knowledge. There is no easy answer. There is no specific outcome, right? And my concern is that we are using tactical tools to solve spiritual problems. And so spiritual problems are problems of faith, of problems of hope, of problems of connectedness, challenges of seeing and listening to each other. I'm not going to get into the stories I got, but being able to evolve as a human species, as a human being, to sit and hear someone that you vehemently disagree with, but still see that person as a human being. That's the kind of, I think that's our next leap in this sector. And for philanthropy, to balance its sort of fiending desire for strategy, and also figure out how to actually fund those spiritual questions. How are you actually investing in relationships, investing in ideas, investing in people, creating a sense of belonging? Those are the kinds of things that are durable in movements. You don't get effective social movements without that.
Judge Abbey, I think the bridge that Sean just talked about is what you do with that puppet show, because you're in Del Norte County, which is a very red county, and you're going into schools that don't actually necessarily aren't necessarily comprised of Yurok tribal members to then cross those boundaries. Is that right?
That's right, but I think you have to look at things a little differently. Like when we have gatherings, we had wellness gatherings before the pandemic, and at first we had raffles because everybody loves a raffle, and here's all the great prizes. Well, about a year or two into it, we changed it, and when you won the raffle, you got to go pick out a prize and give it to somebody. You know, and that changed the whole tenor of what was happening in the room. People could not have been more thrilled because we had nice raffle presents, let me just say. You know, you had tents, you had stuff that you could take. And all of our wellness programs and approaches involve getting back involved with the culture, going to dance, going to learn how to gather, learning how to fish, learning how to make nets, having groups that you talk about. That's all part of what we do because that's what sustained us. So we need to get back to that. You know, we were talking, Geneva and I, about, you know, even the associate judge, who is her uncle. We were talking, and I said, look, you know, you men used to go out every night after dinner to the sweat house. You probably just gossiped. I don't even care what you did. I don't even want to know what you did because it's none of my business. But you guys need to start doing that again because you're just being a pain in the neck. You know, and so that's what they do. I mean, because it made the difference. That's how they transferred knowledge. So we're having more and more groups, and they're organized around activities, doing nets, doing fishing, doing, you know, taking the fish to the smokehouse, doing that. That's a lot of work, you know. So we do things like that, you know, so that people can get it and okay, it's the same thing with the fish. When you get the first fish, you don't eat the first fish. You take it to the elders. Because nobody would just eat that themselves. They would take it to the elders.
Yeah, and Geneva won't order fish in Aspen even because it's just not as good as over at Yurok. Okay,
She's
so
right.
let's open it up. Let's open it up to questions. Show of hands. Kimmy's got one. Any other questions in the audience, from the audience? Let me see. If you have a question, raise a hand, please. Right here, up in front. Anybody else with a question? Okay, let's up over there too. So let's do both of them. Start with Kimmy and then do the one in the back, and then we'll ask our panelists to respond. There you go. One there and one back there. One in the way back. Okay. Kimmy, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for the conversation. This was on time for me personally. A few thoughts came to mind, but there is a question there. We can't flourish without proper nourishment. So really thinking about what that looks like for us right now. Healing requires grace. And I think the question I'm going to ask you, I might not be able to answer right now, and this is a question for all of us as well. Operating in urgency. What does a cultural grace period look like for our own network, for our organizations, and also like how have y'all have implemented like cultural grace periods, right? I know we do it in like right now I'm hearing in acts of resistance around rest, celebration, retreats and things like that, but just want to learn how maybe y'all have done that organizationally or maybe just culturally on a systems level, anything.
That is awesome. That's a great question. What does cultural grace periods look like? Okay, next question from the back, and then you guys get to pick the easiest ones to answer.
Good afternoon. I'm Marjorie Parker from JobSource NYC. I had a similar question. I think I wasn't calling it cultural grace period, but it's on the transformation question, because transformation does take time, which is why we think place-based work is important that we're doing here. So can you share with us some example of how you have worked on transformation, maybe through a place-based strategy? Because the most common questions we get asked, we're New York City based, in Pennsylvania, in Nevada, your place-based work takes too long to plan. And it takes that time to work on the barriers and the histories and the issues and challenges that people have personally, institutionally, community-wide. We can't get anywhere until we get past some of those things. So can you share with us how you have worked on this and what investors are willing to journey along to 18 to 22 months of even getting past some things before you can plan the next step of what you really need to do?
Okay, good questions. Very good questions. Who wants to take one and answer it comprehensively?
I mean, I could try to the first question around grace. So we, in our work for justice, are really good at accountability. Holding others accountable, holding ourselves accountable. We're not so good at grace. And grace is undeserved forgiveness. You get it anyway, even if you don't deserve it. That's my definition of grace. So as an organization, how do I practice and how we practice that? This practice of grace and accountability is, if you're an employee of Flourish agenda, there's accountability. You have to show up, you have to do your job. But when you mess up, there has to be some grace. Like, there has to be some way that we allow for folks to actually learn and grow and so on and so forth. I think we need the same thing in our movements. And I don't think we've given ourselves space to allow ourselves to mess up, to fall down, to get back up. I've seen so many really good organizations implode over this sort of this desire for accountability, but taking people out and taking organizations out because they didn't do one thing right. That's not grace, right? And so part of what I think we need to practice is how do we actually give undeserved forgiveness, right? In our work, for ourselves first, for the people we work with, and even in other organizations that might mess up.
Thank you. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so thanks for the question about time, transformation. I mean, I just think, first of all, we have to acknowledge that we are in a world that doesn't place a lot of value on this, which is ironic, but that is the worldview. It's not a healing worldview. Sean and I go back and forth on different paradigms or frames, but I often talk about, there's the fix-it worldview and then there's healing worldview. And predominantly, philanthropy right now is in a fix-it worldview. We want to fix it, we want to see success really quickly, and we got to be able to document it. So I think we just have to recognize that's the place that we are, and we all need to do what we can to help shift that paradigm. I think it is possible, and I think you've actually written about this. Maybe I'm attributing something to you, but that it is really beautiful to do the healing work and to do the activism together. And in fact, the activism is healing. Yeah. Am I quoting you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can say it better. But so if we think about it that way, it's not an either or, it is a both and. And the activism becomes part of the healing. But we've got to build sort of the more relational work into the process in a way that takes great intention and takes great leadership and takes great skill. And I think that's what's not, in my observation, that's what's not happening enough now. We need the activism, but we also need to bring in the healing.
And just one your question is about the place-based, right? Yeah.
Place-based, yeah.
Yeah. Focusing on the conditions that you want for the outcomes and not the outcomes. And that is, just if it's in a place, have people over, have a dinner, right? Start there. But to start with a strategy and the outcomes, it undermines the value of people coming together and having a sort of shared purpose. And that takes time. It doesn't. You're not gonna get the profound. The problems we're trying. I'm sorry, but the problems we're trying to solve didn't get created in a year. So why are you gonna fund me for a year, right? The problems we're trying to solve it didn't come about over a 10-year plan. This shit happened 100 years ago. So we're going to need other ways to actually respond to the depth of the problems that we're dealing with, instead of having sort of a quick fix. I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox,
that's
but you
all
did
right.
ask me to come up here, bro.
No, I can. It's great. It's all good, and I think that resonates with this crowd. And in fact, it reminds me of the closing plenary last year when we talked about trust-based philanthropy and multi-year commitments. So it's right on point. And Judge Abby, I'm picking up the vibe of and I feel like enabling conditions, maybe that's something you have done in your place-based work, and that's.
Well, what I would suggest is that you practice on yourself first. You know, if I look back at all the stupid stuff I've done, I've had like felony stupid, and then there's others, you know. But the felony stupid ones are the hard ones, you know, because you go, what in the world was I thinking? You know, how did that happen? And if you can learn to forgive yourself or work past that, or to say, I'm going to not be stuck in this place, even though I've been stuck here for 30 years, now I'm going to give that up. You know, that will help you in the organization, because you'll see how it works. And a lot of us have that, you know, and that way, you know, when you're practicing on yourself and you don't make it on Tuesday, you don't have to like rat yourself out. You can go to Thursday.
Thank you, Judge Abby. I'm sorry, we may have more questions, but these guys, you willing to stick around? Yeah? All right, let's give our panelists a warm thank you. Right on. And Mo's gonna come up and close us out. I just want to say, you know what, I'll just, in short, say it is about the personal. And, you know, Sean's first pivot in my head is the one around the mirror. John drives this point home all the time. We are the system. And the pivot I love the most from Dr. G is the pivot from transactional to transformative relationships. And that's what you're talking about. Like, 1 year funding is very transactional. Being in it together for a decade as a funder, that's transformative. And so thank you all very much. And ladies and gentlemen, Monique Miles.
I love this. We are the medicine. Thank you all. Thank you for that medicine and nourishment. I want to close us out, but I want to start actually with you, Madison. And I wanted to, from my heart, say thank you for sharing your heart, your art, and your beautiful spirit with all of us. And I want you to know that I heard you from my soul. I think everyone here, we heard you with our souls. And I just want to say thank you for your willingness to be in community with us in the ways that you opened us up here this afternoon. Thank you so much. And Jose and Jamiel and Geneva, also, thank you for all of the beautiful ways that you show up that are an expression of love and community and the foundation of how we get to hold this network. And I can't, it's impossible to boil down the complexity of what we've been doing, what we've been discussing, what we've been learning and exchanging together. And so at the risk of being reductive, here's what I'm gonna try to just say quickly to connect some dots across the conversations. We heard here in this closing that the actual work before we get to strategy is the pre-work, and that is healing work. And while that feels really obvious, I do think this shift of whether we are fix-it or we are healing has not really ever been at the center of how we've approached work in the social sector. The social sector in and of itself has always had not only a fix-it frame, but that has been reinforced through grant making, which we heard appear this afternoon. But what I will say is that because the work of our network has always been intuitively driven by our communities, by our young people, by our partners, and really, like, I talk to my children all the time in the morning. We say something that I call now the discernment prayer, and it is that we will have eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart to know. Your eyes to see are to see beyond physically what people are doing, but what it is that their bodies are communicating. Ears to hear means that, yes, people spoke words, but what are their hearts saying?
And then here's the most important thing. You are going to trust the meaning making of your heart, and you are going to know how to respond. And because that's really at the center of how we've been doing meaning making at the Forum for Community Solutions, that's why the learning agenda for 2026 is not going to be focused on technically what is it that we're measuring or what is the story of impact. We're going to the root of healing and repair. We're going back to some of the original traumas in this country because we want to do that pre-work as we continue with these other pieces as well. And so I just want to thank the panelists for reminding us that it is the both and if anything, it is the healing that is the most important, because that's what we also pass on to our descendants. The second thing that I want to lift up is this culture of responsibility. And again, connecting this back to ancestral wisdom or what it is that the elders have taught us or the elders expect us. I just want to name the tension that Judge Abby so beautifully named, which is, yes, this moment is hard. Yes, what's happening in this country is hard. But what makes it truly hard is it's so counterintuitive to who we are as humans. There's a reason why we are born with another person, why we are raised in a family with other people. Our human instinct and need is to be with each other. And so when we are fighting in a cultural war that is proliferating ideas around individualism and fatalism and othering, we know that that's counter to the human spirit. And so the thing that I also feel like I want to just connect some dots around is that, yes, that is what makes it tough. But again, we heard echoed here and throughout our conversations, the responsibility we have, a culture of responsibility to know that when you are well, I am well, and that's what solidarity, mutuality, community, and love look like. And what that means is that even if that's not shared collectively in the broadest sort of visioning of our culture, grace with ourselves and grace with each other is important, and it's what sustains us for the long-term work, because we did not create these problems, and we do have the responsibility to be part of the solutions. And then here's what I'll close with. And this has come up again and again, and it's the idea not just that healing is a practice or what it means to heal, but it is that the work of humanity is spiritual work. And, you know, we opened our plenary talking specifically about the role of creativity and the role of imagination and how that must live in harmony with our values, our relationship, the relationship to our ancestors and our elders. And I just want to say that even this question about what the work of humanity is, we've always actually faced this question as a people. You know, John couldn't get into stories from other countries, but we're not the first country. We won't be the last country to be where we are today, and real questions about what the future of democracy look like. But here's where humanity has shown up again and again and again. Working with young people at the center of defining how it is that we move forward using creativity, using imagination, being rooted in some spiritual beliefs and faith and collective grace that we can still reimagine together. So that's the work that we're doing. That's the work that we're invested in. That's what makes us so thankful to be in partnership and community with all of y'all. And what I want to leave you with as we prepare for our work together in 2026 is just a deep appreciation again for your time. But here's the thing. You all showed up with so much passion in your hearts. I had the opportunity to exchange tears with you all, or so many of you, I should say, and stories of healing and resistance and love and community with you all. And so that is the medicine. That is the nourishment. That is the hope, and that's what we're going to continue to lean into, hang on to, and believe in. And we look forward to seeing you all when we convene next year. Thank you all so much.